Welcome to Breaking Down Mental Health with Dr. Jones. In these educational videos, Dr. Jones will discuss mental health diagnosis, clinical supervision, using technology in counseling, multiculturalism, and many other topics to help you get a healthy understanding of why mental health is important. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button if you enjoy these videos. In this video, we're continuing a series on I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. This is a book that has been written by Austin Channing Brown, and we want to be doing today, we're looking at chapter 3 and chapter 4, looking at some thoughts on integration in the workplace. Once again, I want to remind you, if you've not yet purchased or read this book, then you need to read this book before watching this video. It will help to bring some context to the things I'm talking about in this video today. So please make sure you do purchase from the author and be able to read that first before you begin watching these videos. In this book, in this video, we're going to look at chapter 3 and chapter 4. In chapter 3, the title is The Other Side of Harmony. And what I want to do is talk about some of the bullet points I found very interesting in chapter 3 and chapter 4. And I want to relate this to mental health and also just multiculturalism in general, as we're talking about how do we implement Brown's thoughts and put them into action in a workplace. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, regardless of what type of work place you're in. But I wanted to specifically look at counseling spaces for since that's my intended audience for this video. One of the first things that Brown does in this book, in this chapter 3, talks about the power of confession. She tells a story about a teacher who realized that they were being biased and prejudiced towards them and did not realize that. And as I was reading through that part of the book and just pondering on that a little bit, I think it's important for us to realize how important it is for individuals to be able to confess where they are and the things that they have and their thoughts they have, especially when it comes to racial topics. Now, it's not always easy to hear what individuals are saying when they get to this realization in their life. It's not always easy to walk away and not have feelings towards that. But I think this is an important part of this transformation process for all of us, is to give people the space to confess where they have been wrong and to confess places where they can grow and improve in. And this is not necessarily just for as an apology. Some people apologize, and an apology is one thing. Confession is where they're seeking to do better and to actually do the work to get better in their life by first with confessing of what they've done wrong and how they plan on improving upon that. And so as you think about whether it's in the counseling room or it's working with other employees or working with management in the companies that you're in, I wonder sometimes how much space is there made for confession and how open are individuals to confession? How open are they to talking about the things or the places where they have wronged other individuals? And how often are they really thinking about how to help others get through this process and to have the boldness and courage to do this? And I think that's one thing we often do overlook, is that it does take a lot of strength to confess where you have done things wrong. And not everyone does confession right. They may not go about the right way. They may not know the right words to say when they're trying to confess. But there is a lot of power in confession when someone does acknowledge, this is where I've messed up. This is where I've done some wrong things. This is what I'm doing to try to do better. And I'm acknowledging the pain I've done to other people. And so there's a great amount of power in that process. Also, in this chapter, she talked about the power of implicit and explicit bias. And so I want to talk a little bit about both of these separately and talk about them just a little bit together. So when we talk about implicit bias, this is kind of an unspoken bias that individuals have towards other people. And so these are the biases that are held that may be not verbalized out loud, but they're still being thought by the individual, and they end up acting upon that because it's an internal bias they have. And the explicit bias is where someone is actually showing their bias in an outward fashion, and you're able to see it because of their actions, what they're doing. And regardless of someone, if someone has implicit bias or explicit bias, the reality is that bias still is there. And so when we look at confession in that first bullet point, we look at implicit and explicit bias. I think there may be some times where individuals don't know that they are implicitly biased about things until it's brought to their attention. And so I think it's a healthy thing for individuals to be called out, for lack of a better term, about some implicit bias that they're dealing with, or they are exposing to other people. And in those moments, we have to kind of figure out, what would this person do now that I have shed the light on their implicit bias. Maybe it's because of their hiring practices. Maybe it's because of the way they promote people internally. Maybe as a therapist, it's the way I end up treating my clients. All those things can come into play there. And so once someone is called out about their implicit bias, I think the best thing to do is to sit back and watch and see if their behavior changes once they've been called out. Do they become defensive when they become called out, or do they show some humility in that process? And so implicit bias really can be spoken to, and some change can happen for those with implicit bias once those things come out. But once again, I think sometimes you take a step back and see what this individual do now that this has been brought to their attention. Explicit bias, I believe, is a little bit harder to deal with, because when someone's dealing with explicit bias, they know what they're doing, they know what they're saying, and there's a lot more purpose behind explicit bias when they're doing that. And so even though you may call that out in the individual, the humility piece may not be there on their end to recognize what they're doing. They may also not even confess that what they're doing. That may be a very defensive of their own perspective that they have. And so I think when you're dealing with individuals who have implicit bias versus those who have explicit bias, it's going to be you're going to have to learn how to maneuver between these two things and know how to deal with it in the right manner. And so in a business setting, for example, if I'm noticing that I have my employer is showing explicit bias, that may be a hard one. That might be a hard sell. That may be a hard thing to work around, or to work through, or to be a part of a system that is showing explicit bias. And so those are things where individuals have to take some caution and realize, what are they going to do in those situations when that happens. And so in the book, she talked a little bit about the teacher who had some implicit bias, and the hope is that there was some change that came about with that. But individuals who show explicit bias, we don't usually see a lot of change come about unless it end up costing them in some way, form of fashion. I don't necessarily mean money, but sometimes social capital, things of that nature. It costs them that in order for them to change their ways. And so the explicit bias is a much more difficult one to work through. Also, just resisting an education built on a white worldview. The author talked about that specifically in the book. I believe as therapists, that's one thing that we should be working towards as we look at our theories of counseling that we have. I would say the majority of theories of counseling that are out there are built on a white worldview. And so whenever an individual is trained in therapy, they're trained in a white worldview. And so for them to come in contact with someone who may not fit into that white worldview, that can cause some problem between them and their client. And so we have to start resisting that, to start looking for other theories of counseling, or counseling theories that are more effective with people of color or people from minority populations. We have to start looking at that, because we can actually do a lot of damage with individuals when we just accept a white worldview, specifically in the way we are being trained. Also, as we think about in the business aspect of it, the way that an employer may speak to a subordinate there, or how employees talk and visit with each other, things of that nature. They've been taught a certain way, a certain worldview on how things are supposed to work in a workplace. And once again, this can cause some problems there. So I think it's important for us to be educated, that when we go into these scenarios, whether we're the therapist, whether we're in management, whether we're a coworker, and to look at the education we have, look at the systems that are built that we're trying to work within, and try to be honest about whose worldview is that built on. Is that built primarily on a white worldview? Is it built on a multicultural worldview? And if it's not built on a multicultural worldview, the next question then becomes, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to allow things to stay status quo and be comfortable for a portion of the people who work in that company or with the clients that we work with? Or do we seek change, and do we start making things a little bit uncomfortable so that we start a process where we're able to help each other to grow, and that where everyone starts to feel more comfortable? And I think the only way that everyone starts to feel more comfortable is this: we have to upset the apple cart sometime. That's not always fun. That's not always, that doesn't get you promoted a lot of times. But I think there are times and places where we have to realize that upsetting the apple cart means that we call out things that we see. And that shouldn't always be done by individuals who are people of color or people from the minority populations. I think that we can have white allies who are willing to step in and to do that, and they're able to start being the voice behind some of this. That can help with some of the change. And so part of the problem I've seen, at least in my career, and also with clients and businesses I've been involved in, is that that individuals are waiting for people of color to say something, or they're waiting for minority populations to say something, but those populations are so tired as it is that this is another thing to put on their plate for them to have to maneuver through. And so it's not really fair to put that on them to change it, to work or go against the flow of the way things are going. And so this is a good place where we need white allies and white allyship to help through in this process. Also, just breaking the social policy of ignoring race. We live in a society that likes to claim being colorblind, which is a very dangerous place to be. The reason why this is, you'll hear individuals say how they were raised to be colorblind. They were raised to see everyone the same. And that sounds good on the outside. The reality of it is that we are not all the same, that we are different, and we do bring some diverse experiences to the table. And so since we bring diverse experiences to the table, since we bring different worldviews to the table, since we bring different cultures to the table, it's important for us to start talking about these differences, especially when they're based on race and culture. But one of the things I've seen, and the book talks about this some too, is that we get so comfortable with not talking about it that when it gets brought up, it becomes taboo. I can hear the question ringing in my head of many individuals in the past who have said, why are we always bringing up race? Why are we always bringing up culture? This is only causing more division. And I would say the reason why we continue to bring up race and the reason why we continue to bring up culture is because we never have a platform to be able to speak about those topics. And until we're open to talk about these topics, until we're open to having these conversations that are difficult conversations, then we're going to continue to have problems when it comes to social literacy and cultural literacy and cultural competence in dealing with each other, because we just don't know how to get past this. And so this is a social policy that we have let live way too long. And it's okay for us to be uncomfortable and talk about things that are going to bring about change. It is very easy, and it's a cop-out for us to say, well, we're all Americans. Let's just be okay with that. But the problem is we aren't all Americans. And even if we go and say that we are all Americans, we still have many different cultures that live in America. And we like saying that we are a melting pot. And the reality is sometimes we're not a melting pot. Sometimes we're a mixed salad. We have different ingredients, and all those ingredients are important in and of themselves. And so it's important for us to make sure we're looking at all those ingredients and be able to look and appreciate all those ingredients. And yes, we can come together, and the ultimate goal is to come together and to be able to work together. But it's hard for us to work together and to come together if we don't appreciate the different aspects that everyone brings to the table. And so breaking this social policy of ignoring race and culture has to be dealt with in the right way. And so in chapter 3 of the book, she talks about this other side of harmony. In chapter 4, it was titled "Ain't No Friends Here," and there was some very excellent points that were made in this chapter as well. One thing it talks about is the importance of representation. I think this, for me, this is something that is it hits close to home. Thinking about the importance of representation, being the only one, maybe in your office space, or being the only one in your town, or being the only one in the agency you work in, or being a client in a place where no one else really looks like you. But when you find that person who does look like you, and a person who has some different understanding of you because they come from a similar background, it's really a big deal. And I think it's important for us to realize that the more representation that there is in our workplaces, in the counseling field, when it comes to the people that we're hiring, the more effective we're going to be in this mental health field that we are representing. And so I know for me personally, my practice that I have has changed significantly, where about 90% of my population is African American clients. It hasn't always been that way, but it's changed to be that way. And the thing that happens over and over again, I'm hearing from my clients is, I was glad I could find you because I finally have someone who I don't have to explain myself to in some ways. I can make references about certain things and they get it. And that's where representation comes in and becomes so important, that we have to make sure we're looking out to make sure that the clients that we bring in have people that look and sound like them. That when we have coworkers that look and sound like us, when we look to management, people look and sound like us. It becomes very important, and it shows our commitment to not just diversity or equity or inclusion. It shows our commitment to being humans. It shows our commitment to actually wanting our place of business and the clients that we work with to see that we're actually serious about having a place where they can actually feel safe because there's representation there. Another aspect of this is just having individuals who speak the language. And what that means is also Channing Brown in her book talks about some terminology that her teacher used in college. And when she said that, use that terminology, she automatically knew what that meant. And for clients who come in, especially those from minority populations, and they hear terminology that is being used that they get, because this is terminology they use on an everyday basis, it brings a closeness together for them with that person they're working with, because they know that person understands their language. And language is so important. And when I'm talking about understanding our language, I'm not necessarily talking about this person speaks Spanish or this person speaks a certain dialect, whatever the case may be. What I'm saying is that this individual knows this person has some type of perspective that matches with theirs. And so when they bring up maybe some of their favorite entertainment, when they bring up some struggles they've gone through in the past, things of that nature, they are speaking the same language now. They don't have to explain that to them. Maybe a certain song that's from their culture, and they bring that up, and the therapist understands that automatically, and they don't have to explain themselves. And I know so many clients who come into the office space and they talk about how hard it is for them to connect with a therapist who is different from them, because they had to do so much explaining about how different it was for their life, and they explained so many things to their therapist, and they spent more time explaining things to their therapist about themselves than actually getting the help that they need. And so finding individuals who speak the language of our clients, finding managers who understand the language and speak the language of their employees, finding coworkers that do that as well, that becomes very, very important for individuals. Also, there is more to Black history than slavery. This was brought out in chapter 4 quite a bit, and I think this is an important thing to talk about, is that for many individuals, they would hear about Black history is enslavement. That's it. We talk about enslavement. We throw a sprinkle in Martin Luther King Jr. We may sprinkle in a bit about Obama, and that's about it. That's all they know about Black history. And what is important is for individuals to once again to know where they came from, to know their true history, and to be able to know that we understand where they came from. Now, does that mean that each of us as clinicians or each of us as managers or employees need to know everything there is to know about Black history or the history of another minority population? No, I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, though, we should be seeking more education to know more about where our clients are coming from and realize when we talk about certain histories for individuals, it's more than just one event. That there's so much more, so much rich history surrounding many of the populations that we serve. And the more that we know about that, the better we'll be able to speak to our clients and to understand them better because we make that connection with them that way. And so to me, that's an important aspect of what we're doing is that realizing that sometimes that snapshot of individual's history, we only take one snapshot and when there's a panoramic view of so many different things that we can bring together, and people just don't get the opportunity to see that. And so we got to look deeper into the individual's history to learn more about them, and that's going to build trust with them. Also in this chapter, she talked about safety in removing the mask. For many minority populations, whether they're coming in as a client, whether they're coming in as a therapist, or maybe they're coming in as a coworker or a manager, part of what happens to them to help them to get through the day is they must put on a mask in order to get through the day. They may have to laugh at jokes that they don't want to laugh at. They may have to endure sentiments from people that are not conducive to their own mental health in order to be able to stay maintained and employed at certain places. And so those masks are worn for safety because the longer I'll keep my mask on, the more protected I feel when I go to work, when I'm a client, when I'm dealing with my manager. But what happens when I want to remove that mask? What happens when I seek to be in a different place and say, you know what, I don't want to continue wearing this mask anymore. I don't want to continue feeling like I'm only being partially true to myself in this venue. I want to be thoroughly myself when I come in. There's a lot of people who really seek to do that. But if they remove their mask, they remove their safety. They don't feel comfortable being able to be themselves. And you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one of the basic needs is safety. If my safety is not taken care of, it's kind of hard to move up any further up in my hierarchy of needs. And so this need for safety of being who I am, authentically who I am, many individuals don't experience that because they don't know where they can be safe or who they can trust to be able to talk to about that. Also, she alluded to in this chapter about the problem of tokenism. I know many organizations, and whether it's the counseling organizations, I'll talk specifically about that. Maybe it's in management, or maybe it is in when it comes to the therapist they're hiring. Maybe they'll hire one person from a particular population, and what they do that because they want to show, hey, we're being diverse. The problem is, when you only are hiring one individual, one qualified individual, to make sure I say that, from that population, you end up making that person a token hire, whether that was your permit, whether you meant to do that or not. Because what you've now done, you created a situation where you have one person who is representative of their population, with the majority of individuals still not looking or sounding anything like them, and there's no place for them to really speak about the things they're dealing with because there's no one else around that looks like them. And so my suggestion, and this is just from my personal point of view and also from my professional experience, is that if you're looking at hiring or you're looking at bringing in new coworkers into your place of business, do not just hire one person from a particular population. Hire several. That's going to help that person to have to show, once of all, that you do believe they are important in the work that's being there, and you believe in it so much that you don't just want to have one individual from that population there. It's going to show to your clients that you're working with that you're actually serious about bringing in new individuals and bringing in different points of view. Because remember, when we think about culture, we think about race, one individual is from that particular culture is not a monolith. There's so many different perspectives that person can bring, even from being from that culture. So bringing in multiple individuals from one culture can help you to be a lot more culturally competent as a business, as a counseling agency, as co-workers, and it will show your clients that you're really serious about doing it. And I say, if you're not willing to do that, if you're not willing to bring in more people who are multiple people from the same population of people, then don't bring in any. And I say that boldly because I think sometimes it causes more damage when we bring in a token individual from a minority population than anything else. And so we have to be mindful of that tokenism is a big problem, and that companies have been doing this for such a long time, and they will specifically do a minority hire. And that's not necessarily a healthy thing, because once again, you're saying, I'm hiring you because you are a minority, but will you hire more? Will you continue to do that? Does the people in your office space represent and look like the population of people you're serving? And if the answer to that is no, then we probably need to continue to look at our hiring practices that we have and look at some of those social constructs that we have built up that aren't really helping what we're doing. So we need to get away from this problem of tokenism. Also, she discussed the media's portrayal of minority populations. One thing I want you to do as you're watching this video, I'm going to make a point. I want you to pause this video, and I want you to go and look at some things on either YouTube or Google, or the case may be. I want you to go and I want you to Google someone who's recently who's been arrested for a certain crime, but I want you to specifically look for a person of color who's been recently arrested for a certain crime. Then I want you to look for the same search for the same crime, and look for a person who is white or from a non-minority population who has been arrested for a similar crime. And I want you to notice the differences in how the news speaks about those individuals, how the pictures of these individuals are posted on social media and on these different websites, and see if you're finding any differences that are there. And the reason why I challenge you to do that is because the media portrayal of minority populations is skewed in such a way that it really affects us as clinicians. It affects us when we are doing our hiring to be a little bit wary of minority populations, because of the stereotypes that are built through media. And so I want you to just take some time and just do that. Take about 5 minutes, pause the video, and go do that and see what you find out there. And I think you'll be surprised at what it is to look like to be a person of color or to be a minority when dealing with media versus someone who is white, who's dealing with media, and see how the stories are told and see how those stories are being advertised. And it's going to help you to see that there is definitely some bias in the media. And so we can blame media for that, but in reality, we are a part of that media. We make our assumptions based upon that. We not only made our assumptions based upon that, we act and we conclude people's guilt or innocence based upon that. And you may be thinking, what does this have to do with counseling? What does it have to do with our coworkers? Well, we're going to have some of those people come in as clients. And if we're believing what the media is saying about them, we're going to treat them differently. We just are, because we've been programmed to do that. And so we want to learn how not to do that and to make our own judgments by that person's actions when they're in front of us, and not just based upon what we're seeing in the news or whatever the case may be. So take a minute and do that and see what you find. But the media's portrayal of minority populations is something that is very disturbing. Also, the last point I thought she made really well in Ain't No Friends Here, in this 4th chapter, was talking about the need for community. When you think about counseling, when we talk about our relationship, when we talk about rapport building, all of that is built upon relationship. We want to have a good relationship with our clients so we're able to connect with them and to be able to have some talking points where we can spin off from so they know that we trust them and they know that they can trust us and that we'll be able to do some great work together. So we understand community on that aspect when we're talking about with a therapist with a client. But what happens when that therapist does not feel that sense of community with the other coworkers? Where they don't feel like they belong, where they don't feel like they fit in. And when a lot of that time when they don't feel like they belong or they fit in has to do with racial or cultural differences. Then what happens is that we start to see there's a separation there. And just like she says, the thought pattern is there ain't no friends here. And when I'm working in an environment where I feel like I don't have friendships, where I don't have community, how do you think that person's work performance is going to be? How congruent can I be as a clinician with my coworkers or with my clients when I don't feel a sense of community where I work? And so it's important for us to realize that community is important even in the workspace. And if we're not feeling any community there, someone has to step forward and build community. I am from the mindset from this book and just from my experience that happens in a lot of different spaces. I think employees can build some of that community, but sometimes I feel like employees' hands are tied. That sometimes that has to come from management and management showing that community and building that community and providing space for community so that can happen. And I've seen so many agencies and so many counseling places have lost great employees. And it wasn't because they were bad therapists. It wasn't because they didn't connect well with clients. It was because they did not feel like they belonged in that environment. And so they sought community somewhere else where they felt like they belonged. And sometimes agencies will say, well, this person is just a free spirit. They're just not going to ever settle down. And the question I always ask is that if the place I'm working for is constantly losing people, if the place I'm working for can never keep minority individuals working there, is it the minority individuals' fault that they don't want to stay there? Or is it the fault of the company that they have not created a community that allows them to want to stay there? And I know that's a bold statement, and I know that's a statement that maybe not everyone wants to hear. But if we think about that, if my community, if I feel like I fit in, if I feel like I have something to say that's going to be listened to, if I feel like there's a place for me to be able to air my things I'm dealing with, and someone's going to listen, and there's going to be change. If I have that true sense of community, I'm going to stay at that place. I'm not going to be looking for something new as soon as it comes out. But when there's a lack of community, it's very easy to leave places. And I think a lot of times it's important for us to look at where we're working and ask ourselves, are we helping to build that community? And if we're not, let's not be surprised on why people don't stay where they are. Well, I hope this video has been helpful for you to just understand a little bit more about this book on I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. This is a video on chapter 3 and 4, and I'm looking forward to talking with you again in our next video as we continue to break down this book and talk about how we can implement Austin Channing Brown's vision for the book, but implement it in the workplace.